Brendan Marks. It's his job to kind of track such matters and cover the sport of college basketball for The Athletic. Joins us on the Adam Gold Show. Have you detoxed? It's now been more than a week. Have you detoxed from San Antonio? I don't mean that in a literal way, but just kind of unwound from the season.
It used to be a lot easier to do that, but considering the transfer portal opens during the NCAA tournament, the kind schedule makers have not granted us much of a reprieve. So trying to keep up with it as best I can while also sneaking in a nap every once in a while.
All right, well, you need your rest, Brendan. So let me just start with Duke, because we have basically done nothing past the postmortem of what happened about, 10, 11 days ago. We know that Cooper Flagg's next basketball will be played in the NBA. I think we're about 99% sure that's the same thing for Kon Knippel and Kaman Malawach. And I know there are other issues regarding Malawach and his family that, are not necessarily for this show, but are definitely real. But where is Duke and decisions for Tyrese Proctor, Caleb Foster, Isaiah Evans, Darren Harris, and anybody else as we sit here today, again, about 11 days after the end of the year?
Yeah, so, obviously you mentioned there's a lot of guys who are definitely going to be out the door, starting with those three, likely, if not guaranteed, lottery picks, and Cooper Flagg, Kon Knippel, and Kaman Malawach. Over commercial break, Kon Knippel actually made it official. He's going to the NBA draft. So
there you go. Good.
There you go. Our draft expert has him top 5. I'd be surprised if he didn't go top 10. Lottery is an absolute worst case scenario. But yeah, as far as those other decisions, my understanding, I would be very surprised if Tyrese Proctor is back. It's the guy who came in with, first round buzz, reclassifying out of Australia, became a real knockdown 3-point shooter this year, has been a solid point of attack defender, has obviously proven that he can be a playmaker. I would expect him to test his professional future as well. The two who are most interesting to me are Caleb Foster and Isaiah Evans, and especially Isaiah Evans of those two.
Yeah.
I think what John Shire did with Caleb Foster and sort of resuscitating him the second half of the season, I thought he played actually really well in the first half of the Houston game. And quite frankly, I think he deserved a little bit more burn than he got in the second half of that game.
Yeah.
But I think the way that John Shire resuscitated him was huge in terms of the odds of Caleb returning to Durham next season. The opportunity is certainly there for him to be Duke's starting point guard next year. So that's a heck of an opportunity. I think he showed that he has the capability to be that kind of player. If I'm forecasting today, I would feel pretty confident saying he'll be back, but certainly anything can happen. Evans is the really interesting one to me because he's somebody who different programs have been trying to back channel with for months now. His role was sort of the opposite of Caleb Foster. It certainly waned as the season went on. He had obviously that breakout against Auburn, really started to come on in February-ish, and then fell off the cliff a little bit in the NCAA tournament in terms of his minutes. So he's a guy, again, he comes back. He projects as a high usage, probably the number one perimeter option for Duke. His skill set is in high demand. He stands to be handsomely compensated, whether it's at Duke or somewhere else.
Right.
I know that Duke is prioritizing getting him back. If I was saying today, I think it is probably more likely than not that he will be back. Duke getting both of those guys back is a best-case scenario, one that is certainly on the table, but by no means guaranteed.
If both of those guys come back and you throw Caden Boozer in there as a three-headed monster at we'll just say at the 2 guard spots, even though they'll probably maybe all 3 play at the same time for a fair amount of that, given Evans' length. Does that mean that Darren Harris is probably out the door? Does that mean that, prospective guards in the transfer portal like Princeton Xavier Lee would probably not be at Duke?
Yeah, I think Harris is a guy who has been a Duke fan his entire life. As a 4-star guy, he was never going to have much of a role this season. Obviously, he did not. Having an injury in the preseason didn't help him. I do think that there's a player there who can contribute to Duke maybe as soon as next season. I would not be surprised if he sticks around regardless. I think he loves it that much. As far as transfer portal fits, though, that's where it gets interesting. You are selling that you have at least one, if both of those guys are back, and Foster and Evans, and you obviously have Caden Boozer coming in, who's going to play a role, but who I don't believe is probably best suited to be a starting ACC point guard right out of the gate.
Okay.
I still think that you can use one more guard. That's where the portal comes in. Is it more of a wing guard, someone who can do some stuff and play alongside those guys rather than behind them? I think probably. We've seen that John Shire is not a guy who's going to go 11 deep on his bench realistically. So, you know that it's going to be relatively tight if those guys are getting a lot of minutes and then Boozer is there behind them. That's accounting for most of the opportunity. So it's an interesting sell that Duke is in, but John Shire, I thought, did a really nice job last year in the portal of finding maybe not the sexiest names, but guys who could play a role. I'd be confident he's going to be able to do the same thing. They will have to add at least one more backcourt perimeter piece out of the portal, regardless of what happens with Foster and Evans.
Does Xavier Lee fit if we're talking about somebody with, point guard ability? Because I'm not going to lie and say that I have watched him play. I've only read. But from your perspective, as somebody who has morphed into covering this sport at large, does Xavier Lee fit?
Yeah, but not to throw cold water on it, I'd be surprised if that ends up being the place for him. He just took a visit to Florida. Being able to sell a national championship and filling the Walter Clayton role is pretty attractive, I'd say. He's visited St. John's too, who's obviously talked to seemingly every guard who's gone in the portal this offseason. I'd be surprised if that ended up being the fit for Duke, but they will have to, like I said, they're going to have to add another guard. It just depends if you're looking for a starter, if one of Foster or Evans is not back, or if you're looking for somebody who sort of is going to, give you 8 to 10 minutes off the bench. I
would also imagine that, I'm assuming Patrick Gongba will be back, Malik Brown will be back, and you've got Cameron Boozer. They're going to need front court bodies as well, and probably, bodies to play the wing, small forward, no?
I think, most of what Duke is going to have to do, look, between Patrick Gongba, who, frankly, if I were buying lottery tickets on Duke players right now, he's the guy I'd be in on. I think he's got immense upside, and given the fact that he played as well as he did, coming off an injury, not playing his senior year of high school, you give him a summer to get in condition and to work with some of the post, coaches who Duke has. I think he can be a real difference maker next year. Malik Brown's got to get healthy, but obviously we've seen what he's capable of. That is as good a starting, 5 combo as you can ask for. Boozer's obviously going to be the featured guy at the 4. I think Nick Kamenia will I know I'm mispronouncing his name. He'll play some at the 4. Personally, I think it's more like at that 3 spot where you're really looking. Evans can play that role, but that's where if you're Duke and you're looking at portal options, you do have Shelton Henderson coming in. But to me, the front court is relatively spoken for. I would certainly focus more of my attention and efforts on trying to make sure that I've shored up that perimeter, shored up that backcourt. Look, we saw that John Shire wants to be able to switch everything 1 through 5. Mm-hmm. You've got to have some options in the middle of that lineup to make that possible.
Brendan Marks from The Athletic is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show at Brendan R. Marks on Twitter. To the Tarheels, who have, between Henry Vassar, I don't know, I think I just butchered his name, Kyan Evans. Again, I could be 0 for 2 there. Stevenson, Caleb Wilson is a freshman coming in. They have other freshmen, but Wilson is the top 10 guy. They are going to be a very different looking team. How much more does Hubert Davis and company have to do?
Yeah, so for me, the crown jewel of all those guys you mentioned is Henry Vassar. Yeah. He's going to play in the NBA one day.
Yes.
As a 7-footer with his movement ability, his defensive upside, he to me is, he's the first 7-footer at North Carolina since Tyler Zeller. And he is everything that this team lacked this year.
Yeah.
And so I think when you're Hubert Davis, you looked at last season and, I compared it to somebody who had too much booze for the first time. He said, never again. And he has gone out of his way to make sure that next year's lineup will not look anything like this year's. Stevenson and Caleb Wilson give him options at the 4. Evans and Seth Trimble give him probably his starting backcourt. You're still waiting on a decision from Drake Powell. You do bring in Powell from West Virginia who can shoot it a little bit. Again, I still think if you're North Carolina, like your front court is somewhat spoken for. You're going to need to add another big just to spell Henry Visar. He's not a guy who's going to be able to give you 35 minutes a game.
Mm-hmm.
At least I don't believe. You need another big who can spell him. But your four is probably accounted for. Not knowing what Drake Powell's going to do, again, it's that wing, it's that guard spot, somebody who can play with or next to Trimble and Evans. That to me is where North Carolina's still got to go. I don't know that, if one of the other freshmen was going to make an impact next season, I would bet it more on it being Dixon instead of Dennis,
right.
who comes from the DMV area. I think that he could play a role. You don't want to count on him having to play a role, especially in this era of the sport. So for me, again, for both programs, it's looking for wing guys. It's looking for another guard to round up your rotation. In that sense, North Carolina and Duke are kind of shopping for the same role.
What's your best guess on Drake Powell?
It's a tough situation. I think he is one where let me put it to you this way. The number of NBA people I had reach out to me over the course of last season who were interested in Drake Powell and Ian Jackson, I would say 95% of the calls were about Drake and only 5% were about Ian Jackson. So as far as being a toolsy, long 3-and-D, especially emphasis on the D, on the defensive stopper ability, that is what NBA scouts are really excited about with Powell. But quite frankly, him playing up as a small ball 4 last year has left a lot of them wondering, like, okay, we still don't really know what this guy is capable of doing. I think it would behoove him developmentally probably to come back. But if he gets, from the Undergraduate Advisory Council, if they say, hey, look, man, you're going to be a top 20 pick, it would be hard, I think, to turn that down. Barring that, I think coming back, he as far as I understand it, was North Carolina's number one priority this offseason, getting him back. To me, he's the guy who makes their lineup come together. Like, if you've got a starting 5 of Evans, Trimble, Drake Powell, one of Caleb Wilson or Jaren Stevenson and Henry Visar, that's a top 15 team. That's a team that can compete to win the ACC. That's a team that can make the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. So he, to me, is if I had to say right now, I mean, it's truly a coin flip. I probably lean a little bit more slightly towards him coming back.
Yeah.
But again, it truly could go either way. I do not want that to, sow false hope for UNC fans listening. But he is a priority, if not the priority, and getting him back, again, to me, completely changes the ceiling for North Carolina next season.
It's so funny. I mean, if you go back to January and the world was all about Ian Jackson, and I liked Ian Jackson, and then all of a sudden by the end of the season, it was like, well, the other guy's better. Powell, because the commitment on the defensive end is definitely different. Only about a minute left, and I've already talked extensively about what the Wolfpack have done so far. But Brendan, so many new players coming in. There's still I didn't even mention that Mike Abel, a top 30 player in many recruiting rankings, is also going to be a part of this. Looks like the Wolfpack are going to have a completely different roster next year.
And I would argue after the season they had, that's exactly what they needed.
True.
How many pieces do you want to keep from a team that didn't even make the ACC tournament, respectfully? Right. I think, look, this was going to be a wholesale, changing of the guard. You've seen that so far. If there was a guy you'd want to keep around, I think that Will Wade has, and Paul McNeil. I think there's something there. And I like the pieces they've brought in. They're not done by any means. I think Trey Holloman gives you a proven high major guard. Kadir Copeland was a guy who I liked back at Syracuse. I know Joe Giglio doesn't agree with me in that respect, but I think that Copeland could play. I think he's an interesting, point guard, perimeter guy. I'm interested to see how they fill out the rest of the roster. Clearly, this is not going to be a multi-year rebuild. NC State is expecting to compete to make the NCAA tournament next year. I would go short of saying that it's going to be a full Pat Kelsey Louisville-style turnaround just because the money that Louisville was working with is in a different stratosphere.
Right.
But I think you can reasonably make the argument, and I would, that Will Wade at NC State was the best fit of a new coach this entire hiring cycle, and I would be shocked if he is not successful there in the long haul.
Has Mackenzie Mbako already committed to State, or is it still in the strong rumor stage?
If he has, I've missed it, but that's entirely possible because news moves faster than I can keep up with. He is certainly a talented player. He's got a little bit of baggage off the court. Again, was originally committed to Duke, ended up just decommitting, going to Indiana. Did not really, didn't noticeably improve from his freshman to sophomore season. How much of that you put on him versus the coaching staff, we'll see. Obviously, a very talented player. That's a guy who you put him in Will Wade's hands, and he can turn him into an NBA player.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's got the ability to shoot from deep too. Maybe he spent too much time, based on what I've read and seen in a limited way, but maybe he spent too much time on the perimeter as opposed to being more of a guy who can swing both ways. Brendan Marks from The Athletic at Brendan R. Marks on Twitter. That comment about somebody who had too much booze the first time sounded very San Antonio to me.
No comment.
Sounded. Having been to San Antonio. My only question about that city is really why is the water that color? But that's another story altogether. Brendan, I appreciate your time always, sir. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. My sister lives in San Antonio. She's been there a decade. She's still wondering why the water's that color.
It's just not real. Thank you, sir.
Talk to you.
You got it. Brendan Marks here.